Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today for our next session in our series about America's Seed Fund. Today, we're going to be focusing on developing commercialization content. And one of the things that you've heard throughout this series a few times is the SBIR and STTR programs, often called America's Seed Fund, are all about developing a product. Developing something from an idea to a product that's actually going to essentially make money for a business. And when we think about commercialization content, a lot of people kind of get confused about, well, what do they mean? And really, it's just the drivers for how are you going to get revenues for your business? If you receive this seed funding, if you take this forward, if you actually come out with a product, what are the factors that are going to help you grow, that are going to get more sales, that are going to drive revenue, that are going to, increase your tax base, the things that actually will be able to support a successful, a growing, a developing business off of this idea. So when we talk about commercialization content, there's a couple of factors that you're really thinking of when you're thinking commercialization. And the big factors are the market, the customer, and the model. When you think about actually getting something into the product world, into the commercial world, and selling it, things that are going to drive that, the things that are actually going to drive into positive revenue growth are those three items. I mean, yes, there are other things that come up, but those are the three main ones. So we're going to have a section on each of those, and then we're going to talk about how do you validate those assumptions, because they're really just your assumptions. You're not out there, you're not selling, you don't have, 2-3 years of market data and history and revenues and can show that, yes, this is our market or this is our customer or this model actually worked out. So you're making some assumptions here and you're making some estimations, but just like anything, particularly when you go through the review process on these, you can't just state, well, this is my market. Well, why is it your market? Why do you think it's your market? Why do you think it's a healthy market? Why do you think it's a growing market? Similar with a customer. And kind of remember too that with these programs, they're set up in a fashion to let you build off of the things that previously happened. And you're going to see something very similar here whenever you think about looking at the market and looking at the transitions between like a phase 1 to a phase 2, or a phase 2 to a phase 2B, or some other type of complementary or supplemental funding, or even going beyond phase 2 and looking at things like venture capital. You're going to get some data. You're going to tell people, well, this is my market, and they just have to know it. They just have to see why it's valid to think that. And you're going to just really have some larger estimations into phase 1. I mean, remember the phase 1 is all about validating feasibility. Well, you can't say that, yes, this is my market, this is my customer, this is my model, because you're still kind of validating whether the product will even work or whether the idea can come to fruition. So when you look at kind of the things you talk about and the way you list it out, in a phase 1, it's going to be a lot of kind of basic information. We think this because. Now, when you transition off into a phase 2, you might do a little bit deeper of a dive and say, well, we really studied this. We actually came up with this. And based on our direction, we're thinking this. So when you're looking at just even like a phase 1, don't get way down into the weeds of it and don't think, well, I have to have pages upon pages of information. You just have to have a general idea, but the general idea has to be reasonable, has to make sense to an outsider. So let's go ahead and actually dive in here. And what do we mean by market? Market's always, one of the biggest factors when you look at SBIR and STTR. You don't need to have the biggest market opportunity in the world. It doesn't need to be a $40 billion market that you can actually reach. I mean, if it's a $40 billion market, there's probably a lot of people already in that market, and your market share is going to be small. But they don't look at that. They just look at, is this a big enough market to actually support you growing your business? I mean, if your market is $100,000 and it taps out and that's it, probably not a good market. You really need to rethink about what you're doing. But it doesn't need to be some unheard of number where if you sell to everybody in that number, you're going to crash the stock market because you're doing so well. But you have to know that there is an opportunity there. Because when we talk about market, we're really talking about just the group of people who are going to buy the solution. And people here is not necessarily a person, but people is representative of the potential customers, potential groups, the job types, the position types, the job titles, the organizational matrix, the things that go, okay, well, this is a quote unquote persona. This is somebody that will buy it because there is some need out there. And one of the things that people will often do, particularly for these programs, or even for going after like VC or angel investment, they'll give you a global market. They'll say, my global market is this. Global market's really kind of a useless term for most people because global market is just everybody out there. And it's not segmented out. Really, when you're looking at your market and developing market information, you want to pull out your targeted market, those group of people out of that entire market segment that you say, yes, I can deliver a very specific value to them. There's something they very specifically benefit from, and I can actually reliably deliver my solution to them. Because that global market, you may actually be able to reach to a foothold or a place in the global market or a percentage of share in the global market, but that's going to take decades. And this program's not really about decades. Yeah, you're looking at a 3 to 4 year period before you're probably in the market and actually, starting those growth and success measures and getting along that pathway. But in order for you to be a player in that global market, you look at large industry companies out there like, I don't know, 23andMe or iRobot, or who they've all been actually funded through SBIR and STTR. And you can't really say they're a global market. I mean, iRobot, possibly, they actually do deliver internationally, but 23andMe is largely US. I mean, they have made some forays into the international, but it's really hard to actually get your solution into somebody's hands in, I don't know, Brussels or in Sydney or something like that, when maybe your distribution center is set up in Texas or Honolulu. You have a lot of physical barriers that are going to be in the way just because of the way supply chain and distribution, kind of works. So whenever you're looking at your market, telling somebody your global market is this is, I've done commercial reviews on proposals before, and somebody will tell me, well, we have a $40 billion global market. And I go, I don't care. That's not your real market, because your real market is actually going to be segmented out. There are going to be factors that are going to drive you into saying, no, this is what I can reliably deliver. And those segmentations often come into forms of kind of different categories. And really, when you think about segmentation, it's describing where people are, how they buy solutions, kind of the verticals for products. So, for instance, a cell phone. You pretty much have two verticals. You have iOS and you have Android, because almost every cell phone out there, yes, I know there's Windows phones and everything, but their market share is very low. But when you look at, the verticals for the mobile phone market, iOS and Android, because people are going to typically buy one or the other. So that's what you would think of as a vertical. That's that separation between them. But there are other things that kind of play into account when you look at that type of segmentation and why you actually segment it out. Three big ones are region, type, and application. Now, region is just the physical space. Usually you have like North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and what they call MENA, or Middle East and North Africa. Because if you are in North America, it's pretty easy to get your product to other places in North America. Yes, you may have a manufacturing center in El Paso, but you could probably get it into Canada. I mean, take it over probably to Dallas first and go 35 all the way up, but you can get it into Canada. You can definitely get it into Mexico, and that's that North America region. But it's a bit harder to actually get your product from, say, El Paso to South America, or to get it to Europe or Asia or one of these other regions. So when you think about regions, it's that kind of physical geography that will be that differentiator on how easy is it to get my product to people in this region, in this area. And then you have type. And type actually kind of breaks it out a lot of times by how the product works. Type actually a lot of times has segmentations within segmentations, which is a little bit confusing, but you can think about it like, let's not use cell phones. Let's actually use printers. So if you have a printer, is it just a printer, or is it an all-in-one that has scanner, copier, fax, although everybody faxes over internet now? Is it laser? Is it ink? Does it actually kind of set up for duplexing? Is it just simplex? Those kind of things would be a type kind of segmentation on what is it actually doing? What does it, physically look like? What are the aspects of it that decide, okay, does it do this or does it do this? When you think about type, kind of keep those factors in mind. And application is really who buys it. So a lot of times, big application bundles will be government, so B2G or business to government sales, consumer, so B2C. If you sell to, people just sitting there in their apartments doing webinars, then you have B2C market, or to other industries, so business to business. If you sell mainly to, companies, then you have a B2B style market. And there are actually kind of breakdowns in those segmentations. And when you look at kind of those breakdowns, here's where we start to actually get into a targeted market. I use printers because it was an easy data point to gather and has a lot of different segmentations to show. But if I wanted to say that I'm developing a new printer, well, I would start out with the global market. That gives me a data point to start out with. And I have a data point here of 47 point, let's call it 3 billion in 2021. And you'll get a growth rate. Now that's the estimation over typically the next 10 years about how that's going to grow. And they call it a CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, because you just don't take like 100 million and say, well, it's 5%. So, next year it'll be 105 million, and then it'll be 110 million because you still only have the 5 million. Well, it's compounded against it. So whatever that new number is that you kind of figure out and you calculate, well, you multiply that by that same growth rate. And if I had this global market, I would start looking at the segmentations. So looking at region would be a segment, and it's 31%. So if I took that 47.3 and actually took 31% of that, well, I'd have a $14.6 billion market. Now that's starting to actually get down to who is my real market. Now, you see a lot of different kind of breakdowns on here, and this is just taking those numbers and figuring out based on my availability, based on what I'm developing, based on what I'm actually going to sell, who is going to be my real customer? Who am I really going to deliver my product to? Now, do you need to get all the way down to that 1.1 billion from the 47? Depends. For something like a phase one, maybe doing the application and the region is good enough because really it's just my estimation for a start. Or if I'm going like beyond a phase two, they really want to know what's my beachhead. That beachhead is that kind of low hanging fruit. They're the first opportunity. It's the first way I'm going to drive revenues. So for something like that, you want to be a little more specific. And your level of specificity is just depending on how much information do you need to put in there? How much information do you actually want to give? Can I actually say that I'm going to do a wired versus a wireless or a multifunction versus, a single function, or that my application segmentation is, office, which that's commercial, which would be B2B, that business to business. It's really dependent on you and how you want to give information, how you want to present it, on how far down this chain you want to drive. But this is how you'd actually figure it out. You would just start kind of taking those segmentations and going, okay, well, it's 30%. So take 30% of that, and that's going to be my market. And then, but then I'm going to be 60% of that. All these percentages kind of work in a flow down. Now, one of the other aspects that you have with market is market drivers. And market drivers are kind of really only an awareness factor. They're the things that are going to shift the market over time. They're the things that are going to change how your opportunity grows. And they're really things that are going to impact that CAGR, that growth rate over time. Because market drivers are something you can't control. They're totally outside of what you can do. It's how the environment changes around it. You have a couple different drivers here. Really great one is the adoption of ChatGPT. 4 years ago, if we said AI, people went, oh yeah, well, that'll be a future thing. But now, based on the just gargantuan leaps that have happened with AI and ML thanks to ChatGPT, well, that's caused a massive shift in that market. So now those are a lot more viable solutions. Whereas you maybe had a 1 or 2% growth rate, 4 or 5 years ago, now you have a 14, 15, 16%. And that's really going to change your market. But again, those are just things you kind of need to be aware of that could happen, could impact. And kind of to be able to talk about that and recognize that and just say, well, I'm developing this, but if this thing happens, then that could actually really increase my market, or it could really decrease my market. And I may need to pivot. I may need to change up what I'm doing just a little bit to actually reach a better market position in the future. And again, whenever you're thinking about market, though, kind of at the heart, you're thinking about the customer, the person that's actually going to buy what you're trying to sell. And customers defined in a lot of different ways. A lot of times when you think about customer, people like to use the term persona, which is really a description of people. If you have something that is, specifically tailored for, it's a piece of sports equipment and it's specifically tailored for maybe women. Well, that's part of your persona is, female sports enthusiasts that do this thing. It wouldn't be males because it's actually physically made for females. You've actually can see that in action. A really great USDA award to look up is a company called Green Heron Tools, who took the typical gardening and farming implements that we know. Well, some of us use, never really used one, but like pitchforks and rakes and things like that, and shovels that were really kind of designed in a way that you need the build of a typical men to actually use because of where the leverage points are, where the actual fulcrum is, because a lot of them are great big levers. So Green Heron said that doesn't work for a lot of female farmers or female gardeners because they're just not built for those broader leverage points. So they went back and actually redesigned a lot of farming implements and tools to make use for a smaller stature. And that would actually be part of their customer persona. They knew who they were targeting. So when you think about your customer, it needs to be kind of targeted down to somebody specifically that is going to actually get a value or gain a benefit from the product you're making. You know, your customer, like Green Heron's customers, weren't just farmers. They were actually garden enthusiasts who do X. It's like you see this example here. If I was developing an agricultural product, and let's say it was for large farm use for, I don't know, developing a better type of fertilizer. Well, farmers aren't my customer. Some farmers are, but there's actually a defined customer for me. Maybe it's farmers with value-added crops who have field sizes of 40 to 75 acres. That actually starts to tell me, okay, who is my market for this? Because if I took farmers, I get a number that means nothing, because that's going to be very akin to that global market for me. Whereas if I started to look, okay, well, I have data for farmers. Now I actually can see that maybe 20% of farmers do value added crops. And then maybe there are, you know, it's usually roughly around 15 to 18%, I want to say, for mid to large size farms. So that can actually start to give me a breakdown and tell me about who my customer is. And a big thing for a lot of kind of specialized industries is knowing that there can actually be a difference between a customer and an end user. This comes up a lot of times whenever you're looking at like health solutions. If you're developing a new type of insulin, a diabetic's not your customer. They're your end user. They get a really big benefit from it. They're the beneficiary. It does something for them. But your customer is the person that's actually going to pay for it. Now, you know, when you have, you know, new insulin, people aren't going to buy it directly from you. They're going to buy it from maybe a pharmacy or maybe through an insurance co-op or something like that. So that's actually your customer, the people that pay for it. And sometimes you actually deliver a benefit to all of those. But when you're thinking about your customer, it's really who is going to buy this for a specific purpose and that is going to get a specific benefit. So with SBIR and STTR, when you're talking about your customer, you have to show that you deliver something to them that they will actually purchase. It's great to have end users, but your customer is your actual market. They're the person that's going to purchase it. They're the person that's actually going to give you money for it. Because remember, at the heart of it, these are all about economic development and money drivers, which is positive revenues. Now, when you think about those people and why they buy it, well, that's called a value proposition because there is something that they gain from there, some value that they get. And the value proposition can also be kind of sometimes referred to as a discriminator. It's the thing that sets you apart from everything else out there because people are going to receive something positive from buying your product. Maybe you increase their productivity so that they free up time to do other things. Maybe you lower cost on potentially a manufacturing process and you actually save them money, increase their profits so that they can actually reinvest into their business or do something else with that increased revenue flow and profit share. Or you solve a problem or a need that's out there. Think about the last time you purchased something when maybe you bought a car or a TV or even bought a house. What was that defining thing that said, no, I need to get this one. I need to actually purchase this thing. Well, why did you choose that one? What did it do versus others? And here's a big thing to actually bring up with value proposition because a lot of people will get this wrong. They will say that, well, my value proposition is I'm cheaper. Cost is never a value proposition. It could be an indicator for a value proposition. It could actually give you information that people are more likely to buy this because it's cheaper, but it just never stands on its own because there's always something else. It's not just about the cost, it's about something else. If I wanted to sell you a 60-inch LCD TV, 4K, integrated web apps, all of that, and told you it was $20, the first thing you're going to think is, okay, well, what's the catch here? What's going on? Why is it this cheap? What do I have to do here? And that's for like the business to consumer, that B2C market. Now, when you're dealing with B2B, price is never just the value proposition, because you don't know how much it's going to cost them to actually utilize what you're doing. Like if you have a new manufacturing process and you go, well, I can save you $300,000 a year, but they'd have to retool their lines, they'd have to retrain staff, maybe they have to change other things, and it's actually going to cost them, $1 million just to put your solution into effect. Well, they're already in the hole. They don't know, okay, can I actually recoup this? How long is it going to take me to recoup this? So that's why value proposition or price alone is never a value proposition. There has to be something else it does. There has to be something else it delivers. If you use food delivery apps, Grubhub or Uber Eats or DoorDash or whoever, is there one that you really stick with, one that you use a lot more than others? And if there is, why do you do that? Why do you actually use that one? What is the value that they're actually giving to you that makes you go, no, this is the one that, yeah, I'll delve into these other ones and dabble with it, but I'm really going to stick with this one. Or particularly grocery stores or particular online retailers. Why do you choose the ones that you actually choose? And think about why you actually make that selection. What do they actually give you? That's what's called a value proposition. And when you think about value proposition, a big thing to kind of understand is, well, how does this actually stack up against the competition? Because that's what the discriminator is when you think about value proposition. What does this actually mean against the other things I can use? Like if you use a particular grocery store or a grocery store chain, what does it do? What value does it give you versus what other people give you, versus what other grocery chains give you? That's that competitive stack and that competitive advantage. And a real big thing to cover with people before we get too much farther in is everybody has competition. I don't care what you're developing. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care how new and novel it is. You could have a perpetual motion machine and have actually figured out how to completely get rid of entropy, but you have competition because sometimes the status quo is your competition. Sometimes there are other ways that people are getting around the problem. You may not have a direct competitor. A lot of times I like to use the just example here of Jurassic Park when I talk about competition, because at the outset, kind of on the surface, Jurassic Park has no direct competitors. There is no other place you'd be able to go in the world and actually pet a dinosaur if Jurassic Park is real. Let me get that out of the way. But they have no direct competitors, but they still have competition because the value they deliver is entertainment. It's a once in a lifetime experience. Well, for some people, that's a week at Disney World, staying at the Grand Floridian or something like that. So yes, they don't have a direct competitor. There's nobody else that does what they do, but they still have competition out there because people have a limited amount of money that they use for things like entertainment or things like those experiences. So they would have competitors for amusement parks or movies or books or even, anything that's going to drive entertainment. That's actually what their competitors are. Is your customer going to give up their 10 years of their entertainment budget to have this one-time experience? Are they going to go, yeah, that'll be cool, but I could do a lot more with this? So that's how you have to kind of think about competition, is even if there's nobody else out there that does exactly what you do, there are people that are solving that problem and meeting that kind of need. because you'll hear the term unmet need out there, particularly when you think about like your commercialization information. But it doesn't mean that it's totally unmet. A lot of times it just means that it's subparly met and it's not really met. People will work around it, but you have to convince them why they want to use your solution, why they're working around it. And how do you actually figure out who that customer is, though? Now you know that you need to talk about the customer and the value to deliver to them, but how do you actually figure that out? Well, oftentimes you do an activity called customer discovery, and the heart of it is just getting out there and talking to people, joining groups, listening to what people say about the problems they have, and kind of think about the what you're developing. Why did I start developing it? Was it just to make money? Well, why did I think I could make money? What am I actually doing that's different here that I said, there's something here, there's something I can actually sell, there's something that people would be interested in. And you're just kind of finding out some data from them and some information. What are the problems they have? What are the constraints they have? Do they only buy certain things? Can they only buy it on, specific cycles? Can they only buy it from a physical store versus a online store? Does it need to be physical? Is it a service? That kind of information. And even talking to people that aren't customers, but are kind of within that realm and influence customers. So competitors, distributors, providers, find out why they deliver value, what they think that value is. And these are all things that you don't have to do right now, but they're things that you need to really start thinking about when you're going to start to define your customer and your market, because if you can't show a value proposition, if you can't show that there's something that people would be interested in, you don't really have a market. And whenever you put together your proposal, when it comes to that commercialization information, that's what they're going to look at. We're actually going to kind of deeply dive into the customer discovery process and all of these different elements in the next webinar in our series here. Now, you may have actually heard the term before, the customer is king. And this actually does play into developing your commercialization stuff, because your customer is your main link. They are the driver really for everything you do with your business, because it does establish who's going to buy your product. It kind of also guides you on how you need to create it, where you need to sell it, how you need to sell it. Do people buy it, kind of one time? Are they willing to do recurring? Does it need to have, different bells and whistles and features? You can have different customers with different value propositions at the same time, but generally those products are going to have some type of variation, because there's something you're doing with A versus B that, customer segment X would accept versus customer segment Y. Or even when you're getting back to that customer versus end user, there's a value for both of those, but you're really speaking towards that. Why does this group actually purchase it versus this other group? Why is this my customer? Your customer is actually going to drive a lot of not just your commercialization content, but really in how you set up your business and how you start to kind of work towards that market, work towards that just getting out there, being successful and growing. If you don't know your customer, then you don't know your market. And if you don't know your market, then you actually just don't know your business. And these are all factors on kind of deciding, well, what is my model? Because model is something that, like market and customer, you want to be able to at least talk about it at a high level when it comes to these proposal packages. Now, model here just means, how are you going to sell it and how are you going to make money? And model can have a lot of different factors, it can have a lot of different impactors, but kind of at the heart of it, it's just, and whenever you're developing this content, it's really, what is our revenue driver going to be and how are we going to get it in people's hands? Those are the critical elements you need for a business model. What am I going to sell? How am I going to sell it? How much do I think I'm going to sell it for? That actually drives what you're actually doing, what you're actually creating, and how reasonable this is. If you say that you're developing something for, the Navy, and your main sales channel is going to be at Best Buy, well, that's a gap. The Navy doesn't go out there and buy stuff at Best Buy. They put out a procurement call, and then people answer to that, and then they make a contract to deliver so many units to them personally. You don't see I was going to say 5-star general, but that's not Navy. So let's say that you're making something for the Army. You don't see a 5-star general with a, P card and a Best Buy line going, yeah, I need 400 of these TVs because we're doing this. That just doesn't happen. So you have to know kind of where your customer is, how they buy stuff, and where they buy it. And that actually gets wrapped all into your business model. And your business model is really a forecast. It's not what I'm doing now. Because remember, these programs are about growth and they're about development. It needs to be looking at that 3 to 5 year plan. If I do this today, what does this actually do for me 3 years from now? If I make this decision and do this thing in the next 12 months, what does that do for me within the next 5 years? You're starting to go, okay, well, where do I make those decisions on how I'm going to drive my revenues, where my revenue base is going to come from? Even if you can, starting to break down, cost of goods. You probably don't have that information because, again, for phase one, you're still in that validation and figuring out the feasibility. But if you have some estimations, awesome. You start to figure out, well, what's my profit on this? Because if you look at your cost of goods and you say, well, it's going to take me $50 to produce this, but I can only sell it for 55, I'm only going to make $5 on each. No, you're actually going to lose money because cost of goods are just one part of that. You have to pay for operational cost. So it starts to let you know, are you making the right assumptions by taking all of this information and kind of feeding it together and making this model for in the next 5 years, I think I'm going to be here. Well, does that include the right customer? Does that include the right market? Does that include the right value proposition? Because that actually defines how you create your product, where you're creating your product, how you're distributing your product. And notice it, double slide for some reason. And all that kind of goes into your business strategy. Sometimes you'll also hear this referred to as kind of your go-to market strategy, because essentially the go-to market strategy is how do you get from raw good to dollars in hand? And that's how do you actually take your inputs? How do you create your product? Where do you create your product? How do you actually ship it out? What is the storefront going to be? Because there's always going to be some sort of storefront for you to actually take in revenue, for you to sell your product. Even if you're creating something that you're going to license out, well, there's still the customer, there's still a strategy. You're going to have to get it to some point. You're going to have to make the connection points. And that's kind of where you start to think about that strategy and getting into the marketplace. So what do you need to start setting up? Like if you're going to kind of figure out a new type of cell phone transmitter, well, there's a lot of cell phones out there. And if this is going to be a new component that they're going to be manufactured with, that's a lot of manufacturing. You're going to have to create a whole lot of them. You're probably actually not going to set up a manufacturing line yourself. You're probably going to license this to somebody and sign an agreement that they pay you so much. But how do you actually reach those people? How do you actually get it into their hands? How do you get it into your potential licensees' hands? Where do you make those connections? Knowing where you need to be is a lot more important in your kind of go-to market strategy than being there. And that's what these programs are all about. Where do I need to be? Not where am I right now? Where can I be in the future? What decisions do I need to make today to actually get me there? Because at the heart of it, with SBIR and STTR, agencies really don't want to fund a product. They want to fund a product line. They want you to be able to have depth and breadth. It's not just going to be widget A that stands alone. That's the only thing we'll ever be able to sell. And then once we are able to capture, all the market we can, then we just, close up shop and say, pat ourselves on the back and say, good job. You want to be able to have some of those variations. You want to be able to give some people something else. What will you add to it that's going to keep customers? How are you going to, expand that so you capture more of that kind of market share, which is just the percentage of market you can get, which is often or almost always estimated way, way too high. People will say, well, I'm going to get a 20% market share within the next 5 years. No, you're not. You maybe 3 to 5% if you're lucky, but particularly for a larger market. If you have a really constrained market and maybe there's only 1 or 2 competitors there because it's a very niche thing, then yeah, you might be able to hit that 20% within like a 5-year time period. But it's all about how long does it take me to get there, and being able to be reasonable with the information that you're providing. Now, we talked about a lot of information for, well, what are you putting together? And again, you need to be reasonable. You need to show that I'm assuming good things here. So how do you validate those assumptions? Well, the unfortunate thing is you do it with data. So you're going to have to go out there and you're actually going to have to find data. Now, there are a lot of sites out there that will give you market information. They'll actually start to give you those segmenters. They'll give you that maybe global market that you can, make down selections to. They'll give you that CAGR and they'll give you a snapshot of something, because those market sites want to sell you something. They want to sell you a market report that's typically anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. Don't buy one of those. If you're 10 years down the line and you've already captured a large market and you're doing really great and you want to figure out how to move into a new market, then sure, maybe buy one of those. But these are not set up for small startups to actually buy. They're just extremely, extremely cost prohibitive, and you don't really need to know the information down to that level that they're going to actually take you along. But you can glean a lot of information out there from those market sites, because you start to look at them individually. Well, does this one have a region breakdown? Does this one have an application breakdown? Does this one have kind of a product type breakdown? And you're probably going to have to visit quite a few of them, but you're going to pick the data points from there that actually make sense. A lot of times you'll find information represented in, a percentage or like a bar or a pie chart, and they don't give you anything. And they don't give you a hard number, which is actually totally fine. Because remember, you're making assumptions, you're making estimations yourself. So it's very valid to go, well, we assume this percentage based on the available information. Like the first one here, actually all 3 of these are for my printer example. But that first one there gives me the breakdown and segmentation between multifunction and standalone units. It's very hard to see, but the multifunction are the blue and the standalone's green, because you'll find a lot more multifunctions than you do nowadays. You find a lot more multifunctions than you did like 5-10 years ago. But if I took that and I said, well, I'm estimating that 2020, yeah, that looks like about 80%. So it's fine to say, well, we're estimating 80%, or we're assuming 80% based off of this. Or that middle one, they didn't give me the exact region, but I can kind of eyeball it. Now, when you're doing the eyeball, make sure that there is some difference between them. Sometimes a lot of these market sites will actually just give you a form-fitting function where it says, yeah, there are these 5 different regions and then each one is 20%. That's never the case. If you find that even 2 of the numbers look like they're the exact same, it's bad information. That's something you want to avoid. There needs to be some differentiation, because there's always going to be differentiation. But it's totally fine to kind of eyeball and say, well, okay, well, I think this because, or I'm taking a look at this and this seems like this is the case. And once you've actually figured out kind of differentiation, well, then show it. And we talked about like that competitive advantage. Show someone what that competitive advantage is. When we talked about storytelling, I said that visual elements are really great to have because I could have typed up an entire page on how my new printer is going to be different than, the competition. Or I can drop something in here that actually shows, something very simple like this chart will show anybody else where I stack up versus somebody else. Now, you pick the data points that you show on here, and you show the things that are those kind of discriminators, are those features that are going to make somebody your customer versus somebody else. But when you pick them, make sure that you are the majority of them. You don't need a green check in every box, but make sure that there's not one of your competitors that has more dots or green checks or whatever format you use than you, because then you're showing that you don't have a competitive advantage or you don't have a competitive edge. But something as simple as this, as a visual element, actually starts to show those differences and starts to show that variation. That means that my product's probably going to be successful. Now, have I validated this? Well, no, I'm still creating my product, but I know based on information that I found that people are interested in this. People more than likely want this. So if I stack up against these, I can go, well, I'm going to have a great big market advantage here. And I can talk about that in this documentation. I can show that, based on research, we deliver this value that people want that our competition doesn't. That means that we're going to have advantage. That means that something that we're creating has a place and we're going to deliver a value or a benefit to our customers. Now, when you go out there and gather data, it can be a slog and it can be a process that frankly is very boring. I've created these types of market reports for people, and you're hitting 6, 10, sometimes a dozen of these sites just to get the information and make an informed analysis. And you're going to see a lot of variation across these sites. Now, when you see that variation, take the data points that seem to make sense to you, that you think you can justify. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to justify what you write down for, this is my market plan. This is my customer. This is my strategy for getting to the market. This is my discriminator against the competition. So take those data points that you can actually say, if I said this, I feel that I can justify this. And it also kind of goes to show that for these, market companies that are charging $10,000 a report, well, they're not even getting it right, because if it was the right answer, everybody would have the same answer. So you're taking somebody else's advice, and you just need to point towards where you gathered the data and why you think that that's more important than other information out there, why that seems to be backed up. Like if you sell one of these and they also, published it to routers or something like that, then you go, okay, well, this seems like good information because other people are saying that they believe it. And you just need to kind of show that believability. Now, another thing on here, 2 other things that are kind of important for when you're gathering the data. Again, one, you're really not going to get some just number for what you're doing. You're going to have to kind of figure out that number, but growth is growth. So when you look at that CAGR and you say, okay, well, it said it was 4.8% for that global market for printers, but I need to look at what it's going to be in the regions. It's just across the market. It's totally fine to take that. So if you look at that region and say, well, it's 4.8% for the global market, I need to know what it is for that region. It's going to be 4.8%. That's just kind of how they figure these out. And that's a known fact. You're totally fine doing that. The other thing, kind of from our market and action example earlier, is percentages work across the board. It doesn't matter if I take 30% of something and then take 40% of the result, or if I took 40% of something and then take 30% of that result. It's mathematically fine. It works out to the same exact number. So when you look at taking those percentages out, don't go, well, I have to do region first and then I have to do this. You can rack and stack them in whatever way you need to. The math's going to line up for you. So a couple of final thoughts on market and developing like commercialization content and market information before we open it up for questions. The biggest thing to remind people of is that this information is vital for SBIR and STTR. Again, for phase one, you don't need these set in stone. It doesn't have to be irrefutable truths, but you need to have some general assumptions that can be backed up with some specific references, citations, stuff like that. You're still validating. It's fine just to have a guess right now, but the guess needs to be reasonable. And you're going to have this type of information for every single agency. I don't care what agency it is, because I've seen all the proposal types. Somebody's going to want to know what the market is, because remember, at its heart, these are really economic development programs. They're all about growing the viability of your company, growing the success of it, and growing your ability to impact the economy in your region. So you have to show that there's going to be a thriving opportunity for you to actually move into and make revenues, sell products, hire more people, pay more in wages, whatever that economic driver is. You just have to show that there is a market to go after and you're delivering something of value to somebody in that market that makes it make sense. And this is actually not just something you need to do for like a proposal. All this information is big drivers for knowing if you have a good business in the future. All of these are just vital to kind of understanding your business. As I said earlier, if you don't know your customer, you actually don't know your market, because you can't know your market if you don't know who you're selling it to and why they would actually buy it. If you don't know your market, you don't know your business model, because you have to know your market. You have to know where your market is. You have to know what type of market it is to know that, okay, well, this is what my product needs to be. This is how I need to sell it, which is that business model. And if you don't know your business model, you actually don't know how you're going to make money. You can't say that, well, I'm just going to create it and people are going to come to it and they're going to figure it out and find out about it and want to buy it. Well, how are they going to do that? How are they going to find out about it? How are they, going to pay for it? Where is it going to be? If you're going to try and sell to, whatever the current generation is, Gen Zers on Facebook, well, only like 11% of them are on Facebook. You don't actually know your business model because you're not going to be able to sell to that customer. So these all kind of intertwine together and they really speak towards, am I going to be successful because I've set myself out on a pathway? Because you don't, again, need these and need all of this set in stone, totally figured out right now. But all three of these elements, the customer, the market, and the model, are really going to start to drive how you decide to make sure your business is going to be successful in the future and the things you need to do now. So as always, want to mention that the Hawaii SBIR program through HTDC does provide, mentoring. It does actually provide technical and business assistance for helping you start to kind of figure out some of these things and these elements that are going to put together a strong proposal. So if you have any questions about HTDC and what they do, the follow-up email that goes out with all of these webinars actually CCs Cindy Matsuki from HTDC. If you want to know more about the Hawaii SBIR program, some of the things they offer, what they actually do, maybe even their phase 0 reimbursement, that'll allow you to work maybe with somebody that can give you that market information that is going to be vital for the future of your successful SBIR and STTR proposals, definitely ping her and ask her about what they provide. And again, our next session is actually going to dive into customer discovery. So kind of talk about insights versus data, doing things like interviews, and just kind of telling people about what decisions you came to and why you came to those. It's going to be on July 31st. If you haven't registered for those webinars, the link will be clickable when the slides go out. Just click the link and sign up. But at this point, any questions on kind of learning about your market, figuring information out, and deciding who's going to be my customer, why they're going to be my customer? And Cindy also dropped in the chat a link to their upcoming event, the Pacific Tech 2024.
Hey, Del, can I say a little bit about the event?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So the event is really focused on SBIR companies. So we try and bring in some of the program managers from wherever they are, usually on the East Coast. So we bring in program managers to meet face to face with Hawaii companies. So it's a good opportunity to start building some relationships and speaking to a person at each of these agencies. So, and then we also, if you already are in the SBIR program, we try and bring in opportunities to further your technology and your company. So we bring in different funding opportunities, customers, potential partners. And so it's a good opportunity for tech companies to kind of start networking or continue your relationships or find customers or different funding vehicles. So that's coming up end of October. So please consider attending. And oh, I also wanted to mention one more thing. I just recently learned that the Hawaii SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, they can actually help you with some market research. So if you're interested, email me and I can connect you with the SBDC. I'm not sure how in-depth their market research goes, but I know it's at least by industry, and maybe they can dig down a little bit further. So based on what Del mentioned, as far as getting some numbers put together, so you can kind of base your assumptions on something, it might be a good place to start. So let me know if you're interested. I'll throw my email in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. And for anybody that is watching / attending, any questions on just what's important for commercialization content and what's important for market or customers? No questions. We'll go ahead and wrap this meeting up. Again, if you registered for today's session, you will be getting a copy of the recording for today, as well as a copy of the slides. And I'll make sure to include, well, Cindy's always CC'd on the email. So if you need to reach out to Cindy, you can actually just reply to that email or pull her email contact out of that. And then I'll also drop in a link to people for that Pacific Tech 2024. As Cindy mentioned, it's a really great way to get further connected into the SBIR and STTR ecosystem, talk to some agencies, talk to some program managers, find potential partners, talk to things like service providers, talk to those people that are going to help you be able to move your business forward. Because at the end of the day, as long as you're still progressing, even if you have to take 2 steps back, as long as you took those 3 steps forward, then you're still progressing in a positive direction. And you're still kind of making those strides to get to the next step and get to the next stage, which is what these programs are all about. But since it looks like there are no questions, thank you, everybody. The slides and recording should be able to go out probably by Friday. It doesn't take me long to do the cleanup on these, and then you will see that. As always, any questions, want to talk to me more about what you're developing, whether it's applicable for SBIR and STTR, whether there's something there that you can kind of develop and work towards for a proposal package, or where you could actually potentially go with different proposals and different agencies. Do not hesitate to reach out, contact me. Always more than happy to have some conversations with people about these programs. I believe in the programs. Why I started my company kind of doing this type of stuff after being in the ecosystem for way too long. I think 12 years, however long I've been working around these programs. But they're really great. There are just some aspects you need to know that are going to not necessarily equal success, because somebody else's call whether you get funded. We can never control that, but give you the best opportunity and the best shot for submitting something that is complete, but it's also compelling and showcases why they should fund your idea that is going to be a product that's just going to wow the world one day. As always, thank you all again. And if you have not signed up for the next session, again, that will be July 31st, and talk about kind of that customer discovery, customer identification, and then putting that all together into maybe something like a capability statement. And we will see you all July 31st.